Thank you to Birch for sponsoring this video. Their Cyber Week sale is running now and you can get 25% off your purchase, but only for a limited time. So make sure you check out the Birch site for more details. Hello, my furniture friends. Katie here from Salvaged by K. Scott, coming to you from my warm and cozy bed this time instead of out in the garage. The holiday season is quickly approaching and I have been scrambling to get myself ready and organized for that. And I've also been spending some time looking back and reflecting on the year that's about to wrap up. I was looking back through my YouTube studio at all of the incredible furniture makeovers we've worked on this year, and I noticed that I did a ton of coffee tables. So while I'm here all snuggled up and warm, I thought it would be fun to look back and do kind of a recap of those. So go grab yourself a hot mug of coffee or tea because we are going to take a look back at 5 fabulous coffee table transformations. Let's start things off naturally with the first coffee table makeover that I worked on this year. I picked up this whole cane set at an estate sale in the early spring and immediately knew that with a fresh paint job, they'd be right back in style and super desirable again. A lighter version of this 1970s and 80s cane webbing furniture has been back on trend for a few years now and isn't showing any signs of going away again anytime soon. So when I found these for only $60, I knew I'd be able to make a really great profit with them. I started by removing the glass inserts, wrapping them up in a blanket and tucking them away in a safe place. And then I gave all of the surfaces a really good clean with a heavy duty degreaser to make sure there wasn't any old furniture polish residue left on there. Once the tables were dry again, I grabbed my little 3x4 detail sander and a foam sanding pad to start scuffing up the shiny detailed surfaces and create a bit of tooth or micro texture for my new paint to be able to grab onto. I also gave some attention to any areas where the original finish was peeling away so that everything was nice and smooth. With everything thoroughly sanded, I wiped up any dust with another damp cloth and then grabbed a spray can of clear shellac to use as a bonding primer. This is stinky stuff, so you definitely want to spray it in a well-ventilated room and wear a respirator so you're not breathing it in, but it sticks really well to almost any surface and makes a great primer coat. I wanted to lighten up these cane panels back to the natural color that was still on the bottom. So I found a pale yellow shade that was pretty close and had a can mixed in Behr's satin alkyd enamel, which is basically a super durable oil-based paint product in a more user-friendly waterborne formula. I used a soft round brush in kind of a cross-hatch motion to work that paint down into all of the cane details and then left that overnight to dry. The next morning, I grabbed some delicate grip painter's tape and paper to mask off all of that beautiful light cane webbing and protect it from the darker paint that I wanted to use on the frames. I strained some more of that alkyd enamel paint, this time in the color black, through a paper strainer into my Wagner Flexio electric sprayer and jacked all of the settings all the way up to max because this paint is a little on the thicker side and doesn't really love to be watered down. I sprayed on 2 coats over each table while they were all upside down to make sure that I was able to get into and around all of those spindly legs. And once that was dry, I flipped everything right way around and sprayed on another 2 coats. This paint needs anywhere from 4 to 8 hours of dry time in between coats, but I find that as long as I've got a fan on in the garage to keep the air moving out there, I can recoat right at that 4-hour mark. And the nice thing is that this paint is so tough that it doesn't need any additional top coating to be super durable and scratch resistant. On day 3 of this makeover, I was able to peel off all of the masking. I made a few quick touch-ups on the lighter color where I needed to, and then I brought the tables inside and put them back together. This set was extremely popular in its day. There are a ton of them out there, and I think this freshly painted Teak makes them really easy to fit into any modern home again. And with my $60 purchase, a bit of paint, and a few days to paint them and let them dry, I was able to sell this set on Facebook Marketplace in about a week for $700. Before we move on to the next makeover, I need to take a minute to tell you about this bed. When we moved into this house a little over a year and a half ago now, we ordered a brand new Birch mattress for our guest suite down in the basement. And immediately after getting that unwrapped and set up, I went back online and ordered another one for our primary bedroom up here. Birch makes buying a new mattress so easy. You order your mattress online and it gets delivered right to your door, rolled up in a box with free shipping in the US, and all you need to do is unroll it. They even offer in-home setup and removal services if you need them to make your experience as convenient as possible. These mattresses are crafted with organic and natural materials that have been sustainably sourced. They're free from polyurethane foams that can cause harmful off-gassing, and also free from the fiberglass that other companies use as a flame retardant, which can be really harmful to our health. Instead, Birch harnesses the natural flame resistance of 100% organic wool, which also just happens to be hypoallergenic and mildew resistant. They are Fair Trade certified, Forest Stewardship Council certified, and Green Guard Gold certified, which means their products are all free from any unnecessary chemicals or pollutants like VOCs. I have always been a super warm sleeper, and I found that these mattresses really do wonders to help keep me cool and just regulate my body temperature through the night. If you feel anxious about investing in a mattress without laying in it first, because purchasing a new mattress really is an investment, they also have an incredible 100-night sleep trial, so you get a good chance to try it out. And when you purchase your mattress, you'll also get an amazing 25-year warranty. A fun little bonus is that you get 2 of their EcoRest pillows for free. These are made from recycled materials that are both breathable and better for the environment. I love our Birch mattresses, and I really think you would too. So if you're in the market for a new bed, I would highly recommend checking out what Birch has to offer. Their extended Cyber Week sale is running now, so it's the perfect time to upgrade your sleep with 25% off a Birch mattress plus 2 of those EcoRest pillows for free. Visit birchliving.com/Katie Scott to find out more about this limited time offer. Okay, now on to makeover number 2. This solid oak piece from 1989 was a $20 thrift store find that I wanted to keep all of this stunning, beautiful wood grain on, but the patchy old orange finish had to go. I could tell that this was a solid piece because when I followed that wood grain pattern across the top, it seamlessly continued down over the edge. Usually if there was a veneered surface, the direction of the wood grain would change when you got down around the edges. Someone had already had a go at sanding down and resealing the top, but they didn't quite get far enough to remove all of the previous coloring, which had left it looking really blotchy, and there were still a few scars that needed some attention. To strip off the protective poly finish on there, I decided that I was going to use my sander, but to avoid grinding any contaminants like furniture polishes or wax that might be on the surface down into that porous wood, I first needed to wash it down with a good degreaser. Once the wood was dry again, I put on my dust mask and popped some coarse 80 grit sandpaper onto my 5-inch orbital sander. When I had the top back to bare wood, it was time to tackle the base. Ideally, I would have liked to disassemble things to make it easier to work on each piece, but everything had been glued together at some point, and I ended up deciding not to mess with that. The legs and the skirting still had the original manufacturer's finish on them, so I grabbed my carbide scraper with a fresh blade to help me cut through that tough top coat layer, and then continued on with my sanding. To To get into the tight corners, I switched over to my smaller 3x4 sander, and then I wrapped a piece of sandpaper around a marker to get into the concave details on the legs. Once I had everything stripped, it was time to start doing the finish sanding with the gradually finer grits of 120 and lastly 180 grit to get that wood feeling nice and smooth again. Before my last pass of sanding, I filled in any leftover holes on the top with some oak colored wood filler and did my last sand all by hand so I could make sure there weren't any of those little swirl marks left from my orbital sander. I cleaned up all the mess that I'd made and wiped the dust off the table with a damp cloth, which also gave me a good idea of what this wood would look like if I were to add a protective sealer at this stage. I didn't want it to turn that orangey hue again, so I propped the table up on some painter's pyramids and then mixed up some off-white acrylic paint with a whole bunch of water to make a paint wash or water-based stain. I brushed that pigmented water onto the table, just working one surface at a time, and then immediately wiped it back with a clean lint-free rag. So it just left the lightest amount of color behind in that grain. After the paint wash, it still looked very much like the bare sanded wood, but now when I added my protection to the table, the color would stay this way instead of darkening up and turning orange again. This process does cause the wood fibers on the surface to absorb some water and plump up again to a rough texture, but I like to apply my first coat of sealer right on top of that texture so that when I go ahead and sand it smooth, I'm not sanding off all of that paint wash that I just applied. I brushed on a coat of this water-based polyurethane, and once it was dry, I used some 400 grit sandpaper to knock back all of those fibers and brushed on one more layer. Here's one more look at the table that I started with, and here is what it looked like with my new whitewashed finish. I think this table was well worth the effort of a proper refinish, and I absolutely love the way that this light look turned out. Coffee table number 3 is this farmhouse-esque pine piece that I rescued out of a neighbor's trash, so it was completely free to me. Pine is a really soft wood that marks easily and really just lends itself to more of a rustic style of furniture anyway, so I wanted to keep this makeover pretty simple. It was filthy, so like I do with all of my projects, I started with the same deep cleaning and degreasing to make sure that I was working with a nice fresh canvas. I flipped it over and unscrewed the legs and the apron to make each piece a little easier to manage, and then grabbed my orbital sander and an 80 grit sanding screen to start removing the finish and some of the damage from the tabletop. I should have known, but I definitely missed the fact that while the legs, the apron, and the boards around the edge of the top were all solid pine, the center panels were actually a thin layer of pine veneer over top of particle board. So when I started sanding to smooth things out, I chewed right through that layer and exposed the ugly substrate underneath. I had originally planned on sanding it back to the bare wood and restaining it, kind of like the last table that we did, but you can't stain particle board. Well, you can, but it still looks like particle board. It'll never look like that wood green again. So I ended up just continuing on with my sanding while I figured out plan B. I filled in some of the deeper holes and gouges with a little bit of wood filler and then switched over to a foam sanding pad just to scuff the finish on the rest of the pieces. I needed to seal up that exposed particle board because it's just like a sponge that will absorb any moisture out of the air or the new finish that I now wanted to put on the top to camouflage it. So I sprayed it down with some clear shellac to do that. And since I really wanted a natural wood finish on this thing, but I wasn't going to be able to create one the old-fashioned way, I ended up turning to this kit from Teak. Their wooden primer is a paint that's got 60% recycled wood fibers in it, so you can stain it just like real wood. I brushed 2 coats of their light wood colored primer over all of the table pieces, and once that was good and dry, I masked off some of the boards to start playing around with their gel stain and graining tools. I brushed on a layer of their barnwood stain and then dragged this rubber graining tool through it to create a wood pattern. This stuff doesn't dry too fast, so it's really easy to brush it back out and try multiple times until you end up getting a look that you like. For the legs, since I couldn't use that graining tool over all of the curves, I brushed on a layer of the gel stain and just made sure that all of the brush strokes were going in the same direction from top to bottom to create the look of a smoother grain pattern. And I actually liked the way that that plain brushed grain looked more than the heavier graining tool pattern. So I decided to use that technique on the top too. I masked off those boards that were going in the opposite direction so I could make sure that the grain was all going the corresponding way. And once the stain on the horizontal boards had dried, I added some more of the primer right over those vertical sections so that I could go over them again just with the brush. After doing 2 layers of that stain color over each section, I was really happy with the color that I'd gotten, but I wanted to add one more color into the mix for a little depth and interest. So I brushed on one more layer, but this time with Teak's whitewashed stain. I brushed that on the same way and then this time used a microfiber rag to wipe back most of it, leaving just a little bit behind in the details. Once all the stain was dry, I stirred up the jar of triple teak top coat that came with the kit that I got and sprayed on a few coats with my pneumatic sprayer. This stuff can also really easily be brushed or rolled on, but I was ready to be done with this project and spraying is always way faster for me. Here's the reminder of what this table looked like when I found it, and here is the absolutely stunning Pottery Barn-esque after of this project. So far, it's been living down in our basement apartment, and I don't think I'm going to be selling this one anytime soon. Table number 4 features some beautiful teak. This mid-century modern style coffee table was a homemade find at my local Habitat for Humanity for just $15. The top was comprised of a few solid teak boards with some metal brackets holding on maple taper legs that had been painted to kind of match the top grain. The finish on here had unfortunately seen better days and there were just lots of really deep scratches in the wood. I unscrewed the legs and removed the rusty metal plates from the underside and then took the top out to my driveway and sprayed it down with some eco-friendly non-hazardous finish remover called QCS. After about 30 minutes of sitting with the wet stripper, I took a metal putty knife and started scraping off as much of the crackled, crumbling old finish as I could. And then I just used a little bit more of that same spray on some fine steel wool to scrub off the rest. To help me get some of these scars out without over sanding the wood, I grabbed my iron and turned it to the hottest setting and then used a wet rag and the steam of the iron to sort of rehydrate and swell the wood fibers that had all been compacted in those scratches and plump them back up into place. This technique doesn't always work, but if you've got scratches or dents in solid wood that you're going to be refinishing anyway, it is definitely worth a shot. I was able to get most of the scratched areas looking a lot better than they were, so I set the tabletop aside to dry back out and used my sander to remove all of the painted faux finish from the legs. And I also popped the rusted brackets into a dish with some vinegar to let them soak as well. When the top had dried, I added some 120 grit sandpaper to my detail sander and started smoothing out that top even more. The marks all got much lighter again, and then I did my final sand with some 180 grit. I used a lightly damp rag to pick up that dust that I'd made and added a little bit of filler to a couple of deep holes on one end, and then tested out a few stain options on the bottom and one of the legs to try and match the original stain color as best as I could. I ended up choosing General Finishes color Candlelit and just used a foam brush to push that pigment down into the wood, and then a rag to even out the color and remove any excess. I used some clamps to hold the legs up for me while I worked on them, but since these are a completely different kind of wood than the top, staining it the same way won't ever result in the same color. I applied one coat, the same as I'd done on the top, and then did another layer, leaving it really kind of thick and streaky to create a similar grain pattern to the tabletop, kind of like I did with that pine farmhouse table. While the stain dried, I used some more steel wool to scrub all of the rust off of the brackets that had been soaking and gave them all a spray of some rust inhibiting metal paint. I decided to seal up this table with a few coats of spray lacquer because it's really quick and easy. I had a can of matte sheen that I bought by accident, so I used that kind of as a base coat to get the sealing process started. I applied 2 coats of that, and then once it was dry, I used a soft buffing pad to smooth out any rough spots and sprayed on 2 more final coats of the same lacquer but in a satin sheen to finish things off. I reinstalled those mounting brackets and screwed the legs back in place, and then used a tiny bit of gold metallic rub and buff to shine up the feet. Here's another look at how this one started, and here is how it looked restored to its former mid-century glory. This was a tiny table that I ended up selling for $150, so it wasn't really a money maker, but it was fun to work on and let me get some practice with a few skills that I don't usually get to use. And for the last transformation in this video, we have this set of flat pack coffee table and end table with another coordinating table that I found together at the thrift. The coffee table and one end table were MDF, or medium density fiberboard, and the kind of budget friendly furniture that you have to assemble yourself. And then the other end table was solid wood that had already been painted at some point in its life. I wanted to give all three pieces the same finish with warm wood tops and a pretty lake blue painted base to fit into my best friend's new lake house. They definitely needed a good scrub, so luckily that's always my first step. And I used some simple green and a new scrub brush drill attachment that I just got to do that. Since the faux wood finish on the coffee table was already starting to flake away, I used my sander to get rid of anything else that was loose and then just continued scuffing up the rest of the shiny, slick white surfaces so my paint would have that texture to hold on to. Next, since I was dealing with that slippery surface on two tables and real wood on the other, I needed to prime them all so I could ensure that my paint would stick really well and none of the natural oils or tannins in the real wood could leach up and stain my new paint. I used this bin shellac based primer for that. It's the primer I use most often because it's really good at covering all of those bases, so I can use it no matter what kind of surface I'm working on. But since it sticks so well, I don't like to put it in my sprayer, and instead I choose to roll it on for easier cleanup. I gave all three tables 2 full coats, and once it was dry, I lightly sanded off any nibs that were left from the roller with some 400 grit sandpaper and wiped up all that dust with a microfiber cloth. The next step was to make these not wood tops look like wood. So this will be familiar. I went back to my Teak wooden primer. I brushed 2 coats over all 3 tops, keeping all of my brush strokes going in the direction that I wanted the wood grain to run, and waiting about 2 hours in between for things to dry enough for the next layer. This time I decided I wanted to try out that graining tool again with their gel stain in the color driftwood. I taped off every other board so that I could keep them all looking individual, and then brushed on a light coat of the stain and ran the tool down each board to create this really strong wood pattern. It definitely looks a little cheesy at first, but trust me, once you get all the layers on there, it's a pretty convincing effect. When those first boards were dry, I moved my tape over and finished off the rest. And once those dried, I brushed on 2 more layers of the same stain right over top just to darken everything up. Again, to add that extra color variation for dimension and give it more of a weathered wood look, I added a coat of that whitewash stain, and instead of wiping it back this time, I just kept brushing it back and forth with the grain until I liked the way it looked. The last step for these tops was a few layers of triple Teak top coat for protection. I gave my container a good stir to make sure all of the components were well incorporated, and then brushed on 2 layers of that. The next day, I masked off the tops and got myself set up to paint these bases. I went back to this satin enamel paint from Bear, but this time I had it mixed in their color English Channel, which is this gorgeous deep blue, and I wanted to spray this with my pneumatic gun. Respirator on, air compressor ready, flow tested out on some scrap cardboard, and then I got started again with the tables upside down to get around and into all of those hard to reach spots. Like I mentioned earlier, this paint takes anywhere between 4 to 8 hours in between coats. But once that was done, I flipped them the right way up and got another 2 coats on there. No top coating required for this stuff either, so that is always a bonus. While my last coat of paint was drying, I cleaned up the painted over cup pulls from the one table with my little rotary tool, and then sprayed those and the handle from the other end table to match with some antique brass spray paint. You know the drill. Here's your reminder of the before, and here is what I was able to do with this thrifted set. I've used a ton of darker blue hues on my furniture flips this year, and I have to say this is one of my favorite shades so far. I love how it looks with the warm weathered wood tops too. Thank you so much for hanging out with me as I reminisce through some of this year's work. I hope you're feeling inspired to go rescue or recycle some discarded furniture sometime soon. I also hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you all next time.